Hi, everybody, and thank you for coming to this Meditation for Life presentation with Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. Bhikkhu Bodhi is an American Buddhist monk ordained in Sri Lanka and currently teaching in the New York and New Jersey area. He is president of the Buddhist Association of the United States, president of the Buddhist Publication Society, founder and chair of Buddhist Global Relief that has done a great deal of work around hunger relief. And he is also author, editor, and translator from the Pali language into English of many important Theravada Buddhist publications, especially the Buddha's suttas, many suttas. And for us, maybe perhaps most importantly, Bhikkhu Bodhi wrote the book called The Noble Eightfold Path, Way to the End of Suffering. And as I mentioned before, about 30 years ago, my first meditation teacher, Shinzen Young, introduced me to this book as a must-read in our Sangha. And so I like the fact that it clearly laid out the entire Buddhist doctrine and the Buddhist path in a mere 100 pages. So that's why I chose it for our Buddhist study group to read. And having gone through multiple printings over the years, I think that the book is just as relevant today as it was 36 years ago when it was first published. So Bhikkhu Bodhi is also a member of the Buddhist Action Coalition of New York, which is dedicated to bringing Buddhist morals and values into action in order to bring about true justice. And for many years, Bhikkhu Bodhi has studied not only the Buddhist canon, but also our current capitalism and its systemic economic inequalities, as well as its nefarious impact on climate change. And most amazing even, he is not afraid to offer his comprehensive critique of it with his twinkly good spirits. So I am honored to welcome among us Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, who is going to speak about the current event and showing us the way.
You know, one thing I should clear up that makes me feel always a little embarrassed when people introduce me as the president of the Buddhist Association of the United States. It sounds so impressive. Like all of the Buddhists in the United States are somehow under my presidency. But actually, you see, the Buddhist Association of the United States was founded in 1964 by a group of Chinese Buddhists in New York City. And they chose that very presumptuous title for their organization, which actually oversees only two institutions. One is Zhuangyan Monastery in upstate New York, where I live. And then there's a branch temple in the Bronx in New York City. And that's it.
Well, you fooled us.
So it seems my territory stretching over the whole United States has been shrunk to one monastery. At least I could say we have 200 acres here, though most of it is just forest, woodlands.
Yeah, but I think your reputation doesn't come from that title.
Yeah. And also I should mention that I live together with Shinzen Young. I don't know if he told you this. Back in, it was the summer of 1972, I was staying at a place called the International Buddhist Meditation Center in Los Angeles, which was established by a Vietnamese monk named Thich Tin An. And then Shinzen had just I'm not sure whether he had completed his doctorate or whether he had completed his coursework and was going to work on his doctorate. But he had studied at the University of Wisconsin in their Buddhist studies program, but his family was from Los Angeles. And so he had come back to Los Angeles, and then he stayed for some time with us at the International Meditation Center. So I knew him then.
Oh, I didn't know you were there, because I met him when he was back there after he had spent 10 years in monasteries, and became monk. And he started teaching in Los Angeles, starting from there. And then he moved and created his own Vipassana Institute, it was called then. Yeah. So, but I didn't know that you two had met there. No.
Yeah, this probably was around early August, 1972.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let me speak a little bit sort of informally first, a little biographically. Okay, before I encountered Buddhism, when I was a graduate student in philosophy at the Claremont, at that time it was called the Claremont Graduate School. Now it's called the Claremont Graduate University. And so I had a very keen concern with social issues, which were being fomented at that time, particularly, and maybe this was a little bit self-seeking, in opposition to the war in Vietnam, because I was in the AIDS group that was vulnerable to the draft. So I did have a student deferment, so I wasn't in direct danger of being drafted, but it was still a kind of threat that was perpetually hanging over us. Okay, and it was at that time that I encountered Buddhism through my first teacher, who was a Vietnamese Buddhist monk who came to study at Claremont Graduate University. And once I became involved with Buddhism, then I came to see that it was, in the first place, it was essential and critical that I work on myself, work on my mind, on cultivating the mind. And so somehow I let drop all of these social concerns and just focused during that period, I focused on completing my doctorate in philosophy. Then almost immediately after that, I went to Sri Lanka and I was ordained as a Buddhist monk, and then devoted my time to studying the Dharma, studying Pali and Sanskrit at that time, and meditation. And pretty much I was almost enclosed within the world of Buddhist studies and Buddhist practice. So always in the back of my mind was some concern about what is taking place in the world. But living in forest monasteries in Sri Lanka, one doesn't have much access to information about developments taking place in the world. But particularly after I came back to the United States to reside permanently in the United States, and then for the first time, I got access to the internet and can see through many, many channels, many, many websites, what is taking place in both in this country, regionally, and what is taking place on the global scale in the world. And in this way, my concern for the social, political, ecological, cultural developments was reignited. So I came to see that it's not sufficient to follow, call a very traditional Buddhist path of just focusing on purely studying the Dharma, practicing according to the classical instructions and aiming at one's own liberation. But this exposure to information about the world sort of, in a sense, it ignited a set of a crisis of conscience, particularly when I would speak to other people, other Americans who were involved with Buddhism. And I found people are concerned with their practice, and their practice is almost always formulated in terms of how their meditation is going, what kind of meditation they're practicing, how they are doing in their meditation. And I was reading through the internet, also through journals, about now the war was, the US was embroiled in this war in Afghanistan, Iraq, other places. thousands and thousands of, on false, what was clearly false pretexts. I was reading about how innocent people are being killed, children are being burned and hit by these drone attacks. And this was really disturbing, sort of pulling at the strings of my heart. And so I came to see that it's really necessary to develop what I call a wider perspective on Buddha's practice, and to see how the teachings of Buddhism can provide a lens for understanding what is taking place in the world, provide a motivation for taking action to transform the world, and provide guidelines, values, and ideas for bringing about a world, a society, a nation, a community that is truly more congenial to human flourishing than the kind of world that we've been creating. And now, sort of when I take a sort of broad overview of what is taking place in the world, and particularly in this country, I see maybe 4 major challenges that humankind is facing, or that we are facing in this country. And though I enumerate 4 particular areas, what I want to emphasize is that in many ways, these 4 areas are interwoven and intersecting, and also that the 4 are not exhaustive, that you could bring in many other issues as well. But these are the 4 that stand out predominantly in my mind. Okay, one issue that's come very prominently right to the forefront of our consciousness over the last month or so is the persistence of racism in this country, a problem that goes back, centuries, and that was supposedly healed or cured with the election of the first Black president, Barack Obama, but now, in a sense, that was sort of pushed under the rug, and now it's sort of sprung out into the open after the election of Donald Trump. And I have to make it clear that I don't endorse candidates for president or don't reject any candidates, but this is just a fact that has come out into the open, particularly the way, what's been particularly shocking month after month, year after the year, is police killings of unarmed Black people. And that brings up to the surface what we call it the cruelest, the harshest, the most manifest expression of racism in the midst of this country. But there have been more subtle forms which are just operating, almost below the threshold of our ordinary perception, maybe for at least for the white majority, like what they call is it the school to prison pipeline, and the voter suppression, and other manifestations. So this is a persisting problem that has now come to the surface. And at least what is somewhat consoling is, even without input from the Dhamma, but one could see from the demonstrations that were taking place after the killing of George Floyd, the marches, the demonstrations, that there's been an upsurge of resistance and opposition to this police brutality and these harsher manifestations of racism. But anyway, this is one major problem area, particularly for this country, but also it has global ramifications. For example, what are the countries that this country will bomb, and which countries won't they bomb? So it will bomb countries in the Middle East, because those are brown people speaking a different language, different religion, different ethnicity. But probably if we had hostile relations with European countries, we wouldn't choose to bomb them. Okay. Well, then the racism is taking another form with this president, the attack on China being manifested in an upsurge of hostility towards Asian Americans, particularly people who have Chinese features, whether they're actually Chinese or not. Okay, so we have racism. Then intersecting with this, but not entirely the same, a second major area is economic inequality. Inequality, vast and expanding inequality in wealth and in income. I don't have the latest statistics in front of me right now, but we have like the small, very small number of people, this extremely wealthy, powerful economic elite, which has holdings in the billions and billions of dollars. And the vast majority of people in this country are living, well, I don't want to say the vast majority are living in poverty, but more and more people are being pushed down into poverty. And so the statistics that I heard from the Poor People's Campaign, something like 40% of people in the United States are living either in poverty or low income. And the way the economy is being structured, and even things like these stimulus package after the coronavirus is being, the way the funds are being directed, is leading to more and more wealth being directed towards the wealthy, powerful elite. And other people, working people, are just being given a kind of pittance just to placate them without really satisfying their needs. And so people are living in quite desperate conditions. Lots of people are being evicted from their homes. In this country, surprisingly, hunger is widespread, because I have an organization, Buddhist Global Relief, which is concerned to address the problem of chronic hunger and malnutrition. We find that in the United States alone, it's something like 48 million people face constant food insecurity. Lots of people are just, struggling to get by from day to day. And then people are subsisting on the SNAP, the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, what they also call food stamps. But the government or the Congress, or let us say this, at least certain sections in Congress, are constantly trying to chip away at that program, to put up more stringent requirements, to reduce the benefits that are going to people who are desperately need food assistance. So that is within the United States, but globally we have like so many, probably 2 billion people out of a population, global population of 7 billion, 7.5 billion people, 2 billion people living either in poverty or on the verge of poverty. And a statistic that sort of led us to form Buddhist Global Relief. When I was looking at this issue, we found that something like 800 million people around the world are constantly plagued by food insecurity, and something like 6 million people every year, the majority of them children, die from hunger or illnesses related to hunger. Okay, so this is a second issue in which there's also an intersection with the racial issue in the United States, since there are great disparities in wealth and income between whites on the one side and African Americans and Latino people on the other side. But in a way, that simple statement is a little deceptive, because there are large numbers of white people who are also living in poverty or close to poverty. Okay, a third issue, which doesn't make, very prominent news nowadays, but it is something that's constantly going on, and that is the persistence of war and conflict, the US involvement in war and conflict. And even when we are not explicitly or actually engaged in war, but still we have an economy which is built up upon a commitment to militarization. So we have a virtual militarization of the economy, whereby something like, I think it's within the discretionary budget, something like 52 cents out of every dollar goes to the military budget. And that is the official expenditure of military expenditure is something like $780 billion. But when you take all of the expenditures on military projects and concerns, it comes to more than $1 trillion. And at the same time, we have rather desperate social and economic support systems in this country, collapsing educational systems, public educational systems, not getting anywhere near the monetary support that it needs, a for-profit healthcare system in which so many people are not able to afford healthcare. If they're unemployed, they're not able to get healthcare through their employment, through their employers. States that are refusing to expand Medicaid, leaving, again, millions of people without any means of support in times of sickness. So this is a third area, that is the militarized economy, which you can see overlaps with the problem of the disparity in wealth between rich and poor. And then the fourth area, which I mentioned last, but using the cliche, I have to say last but not least, but actually it's the problem which really overshadows everything else and can bring the whole, the whole pyramid crashing down to the ground, and that is the gradual increase of the conditions for climate change. So that the climate is being constantly destabilized, undermined. We see manifestations of this of course, we see increasing droughts, longer hot spells, torrential floods, more violent hurricanes. But probably the most destructive manifestations of climate change are things which are not so immediately visible, but it's the gradual, almost imperceptible increase in global temperature from year to year, which is preparing the way to unleash vast amounts of carbon that is stored within the earth and in the oceans, to release it from the places where it's buried within the earth and the oceans, to release it into the atmosphere, where it will create so much violent, destructive impacts that it could even undermine the very foundations of human civilization. So these are some of the, I would say, the vast global and national problems that we're facing. And in a way, what I'm doing here is bringing in a Buddhist type of analysis, or a Buddhist approach, whereby in the structure of the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha begins with the noble truth of dukkha, the noble truth of suffering. And he lays out the different manifestations of suffering. And then he goes, in the second noble truth, he goes into the cause or origin of suffering. So we would take a similar approach in looking at these manifestations of global or collective or social suffering. We would use a similar approach by inquiring, after laying out some of these manifestations, like, what are the underlying roots or causes of the suffering that's afflicting the entire human community on this planet? And so I would say that these causes are basically the same causes that the Buddha pinpointed in his formulation of the Four Noble Truths. So he says, like, what is the cause of dukkha? He says it's craving. And then what is the underlying root of craving? It's avijja, ignorance. And so we have craving and ignorance working together as the fundamental causes of personal dukkha, personal suffering. And when we look at human society as in its broader dimensions, we see, again, craving and ignorance. Another way to sort of diagnose the causes in terms of the three, what the Buddha calls the three akusala mula, which we translate the three bad roots: greed, hatred or aversion, and ignorance or delusion. And so we would say that one of the ways in which greed manifests today, especially when it's coupled with our technological capabilities, is in a phenomena that I would use this expression, the commodification of the world. So we could say that greed becomes expressed in the free market, the form of free market capitalism, unrestrained, unregulated capitalism, which by its very logic, by its very underlying dynamics, has to turn everything into either a potential resource for production or a potential commodity for sale on the marketplace. So everything is reduced to its bare utility value, the very idea of an intrinsic or inherent value to nature, to natural phenomena, forests, rivers, other bodies of water, the landscapes. All of that is obliterated with the idea, how can we use this to generate profits in order to keep the company, the corporation, ourselves as the stockholders or management of the corporations, to increase our wealth. So we look at the natural world as nothing but a source of raw materials to make products, to gratify human desires, which have to be intensified, increased, proliferated, and then constantly satisfied and then inflamed again to keep on increasing the margin of profits. And under the reign of this system, the domination of the system, the human beings as well are turned either into workers who are to be paid minimum wages, the lowest level of salaries that are possible that we could get away with, and to be turned into consumers. So we use them to work as workers, and then we treat them as consumers. And so we see this playing out with one of the tragic manifestations of this today is with the spread of the coronavirus, where people, in order to be able just to subsist from day to day, they have to go to work on these essential services. And the companies, the corporations, the businesses, in order to maintain at least some standard of maybe not exorbitant profits, but to keep the company running, they have to compel the workers to report to work, even though the workers, the work staff, undertake tremendous risks to their own health, their own lives. And so many are contracting the virus and even numbers are dying. One particular place where this is occurring is in the meat processing plants. Probably many of you have read about this. The meat processing plants in the Midwest, in, where is it, Iowa, Nebraska, Oklahoma. And the workers there are largely immigrant populations. Some are African Americans, some are Asians, but probably the majority Latino immigrants. And the decree went out about a month and a half ago from the president that the meat processing plants have to open, they have to function in order to supply the nation with its food, its essential food. And so many workers were compelled to go to work, and a large number a large proportion of them fell ill with the coronavirus. And the number, I don't remember the exact number, maybe 200, 400 died from the virus. Anyway, so this is the way, under the kind of logic of the system, people lose their value, their intrinsic value as human beings, and they are reduced to functionaries to serve the ends of the corporations as workers, customers, clients, or consumers. And so the world then becomes a kind of marketplace, or even a battleground marked by relentless competition, in which each person or each group, each company is competing to prevail over the others. So these are some of the manifestations of greed. Okay, then we could say that hatred becomes manifest, particularly I would say today, in the suspicions that people feel towards others who may be of a different race, a different religion, come from a different part of the world, speak a different language. And so we see this in this country today, manifesting maybe particularly in the hostility towards immigrants and some very cruel policies being enacted, or at least proposed. I mean, just the other day, this ICE sent out this decree that international students studying in colleges and universities here in the United States who are enrolled in colleges or universities in which all education will be given remotely online will not be allowed to stay in the United States, but have to return to their own countries. And that means millions of students whose entire future depends on their ability to complete their studies here in the United States will be kicked out of the country, unless I think a lawsuit has been launched by the American Civil Liberties Union against that decree by ICE. But anyway, that's just one particular manifestation of hostility towards immigrants. The other, we see the drive to build this wall at the border and the treatment of immigrants, many who are fleeing very oppressive conditions in Central America, coming to the US desperate to start a new life, women with their children, and the children are ripped away from them and they're put in these encampments, living under very harsh conditions. So these are some, it might not be hatred in the form of outbursts of violence, but it's a kind of subtle way in which hostility is expressed on the basis of differences. And so through this, the work, the operation of this very deep root of the human mind, we create fixed boundaries between those who belong to the in-group, us, and those who belong to the out-group, them. And then we look, those of us on the in-group, look on those at the out-group with fear and distrust. And then that fear and distrust, when it gains momentum, it turns into hostility and conflict and even violence. And at a larger scale, maybe it's this kind of citadel mentality that sustains the weapons industry, the powerful weapons industry, and the militarization of the economy, so that we have like something like 700, 800 military bases around the world, all which have to be sustained at great expense, all for the purpose of protecting us against potential attacks from them. Okay, then the third underlying root, what the Buddha pinpoints as the third root of all that is harmful and destructive, is delusion or ignorance. And delusion or ignorance really underlies greed and hatred, but it also has its own particular particular manifestations. And one of these manifestations is, we could say, is false ideologies. Or even we could say, maybe one of the manifestations of delusion is a refusal to face the truth, to face reality. And we could see this almost shocking today is the widespread denial in this country, the denial of the reality of scientific findings, of obvious, clear scientific findings. You know, when I grew up, 1960s, I'm not saying that we were living in a paradise then, but at least people at that period, at least to my knowledge, the people that I grew up with, we accepted science as being the authoritative source of truth. We would never have imagined that if it's the almost unanimous proclamation of scientists that such and such is the case, that climate change is real and is caused by human activities. We'd never have imagined that there would be a well-funded, powerful group of people who would be able to spread the misinformation, disinformation, that is false or fake news, and that climate change is just a hoax, or the real cause are explosions on the sun or something else. But one would accept the declarations of science, and one would act on those recommendations of scientists. And now you could see the denial of science with very tragic consequences on a day-to-day basis. Sort of another very strong display of delusion in the way our US population has become polarized around the issue of whether you wear a mask or not. And so if you are one of those unfortunate majority who believes in science, when you go out into public places, you will be a rather timid, fraidy cat, is that the expression we would use? Scaredy cat, and wear a mask. But if you're a real macho American living on red meat and with a star-spangled banner behind you, you don't wear a mask. But you will go to rallies, demonstrations, to the beach, to parties without a mask. Okay, so these are, well, some of the more stupid displays of delusion. But I would say that these more stupid displays of delusion have more pernicious undercurrents, more pernicious forms. So I would say like one particular maybe ideology grounded in delusion is the idea that the free market operating on its own without any constraints, without any regulations, will ultimately improve the living conditions of everyone. That the free market will ultimately benefit all. We just have to be patient and let it go to work according to its own inner laws, and eventually it will promote the good of everyone. Though after some 30 years of complete, since the government has been subscribing to these neoliberal free market ideologies, we could see that this promise of the free market has turned out to be hollow. And perhaps it's really being underscored by the way the coronavirus, the pandemic, is crashing the entire economy. And hopefully this will be a wake-up call that we need an alternative, a new, more socially beneficial economic model grounded upon different concerns than that of the drive for profits. Okay, so now I've sort of laid out what I would call a look at our collective problems from the standpoint of the second noble truth, the truth of the cause of dukkha. So what kind of solutions are we going to pursue? And I would say we certainly need, I would say, fundamental changes in policies and institutions. But I would say for these to be effective, mere changes at the governmental level are not sufficient. From a Buddhist point of view, what I would say is we also need inner changes. But then again, what I want to say, and this is where my critique of Buddhists will come, that mere inner change is not enough, in the sense it's not enough just to go into our meditation rooms or meditation halls and practice loving kindness and vipassana meditation and thinking that's sufficient. But we have to bring together changes in the inner domain and express them in action, in pushing as citizens of, at least we still have the basic democratic country, still pushing for changes in the public domain, in policies and in institutions. And so to guide us with the appropriate inner changes, we have such teachings as the 5 precepts as a framework for right action: not killing, not stealing, no sexual misconduct, not speaking falsely, not using intoxicants. But we also need certain, besides just externally observing precepts, we need certain inner kinds of values to guide us. And what I would say, we could extract from Buddhism a set of values to guide us in pushing for the kinds of changes we need in our collective political and social and economic systems. And earlier, Noel mentioned that I've been involved with an organization established in New York City called the Buddhist Action Coalition. So I'd just like to share with you some of the guiding values that we developed in our initial stages when we established this coalition. And I think this will show you the kinds of values that we can derive from the Buddha's teachings, though not always in every case exactly matching concepts that we already have in Buddhism. So the first of these is what we call discernment. And I have to take credit for that term myself. Not that I invented the word, but I was the one who added this to the list of values and put it at the beginning, because it corresponds to right view at the beginning of the Noble Eightfold Path. But here, in relation to our collective life, our communal life, by discernment, what we mean is a clear, deep, and morally motivated understanding of the destructive and toxic social and political forces at work in our society and in the world at large. So it's when we get this discernment, a willingness to look at, to pierce through myths, to pierce through alternative facts and fake news, and look at things correctly and accurately, that we see what are the factors that are responsible for the different problems that we're facing and what we have to change. Okay, then the second, we put solidarity. And by solidarity, I mean a sense of the essential unity of all human beings, rooted in the understanding that all people equally seek to be well, happy, safe, and free from suffering. Yeah, so I would say that solidarity, this arises, what I found in my own case, that it arises through the practice of the loving kindness meditation. So when you do this meditation, taking other people, one sees that everybody really wants to be well, happy, free from suffering. So in this way, there should be no discrimination or distinctions between us and them, but we realize we are all in this together, and we have to work together to create systems, social and economic systems, that will benefit everybody equally. Okay, then the next two values are in a way just spelling out some of the implications of solidarity. One is love, which is the actual concern to promote the well-being, safety, and happiness of others. And the next is compassion, and that is the urge to alleviate the suffering of others, not simply at the superficial level, but by going down to the causal level. Through our discernment, we see the causes. Through compassion, we are ready to tackle those causes and to eliminate them or transform them. Okay, the next value we had is justice. And by this, I mean social, political, and legal justice based on the principle that all people should be treated fairly and should be free to actively shape the institutions that govern their lives. And then going along with justice, the kind of counterpart to justice, is what we call equity, which is the conviction that all people should receive an adequate share of the material resources of life, as well as healthcare, extremely critical today, education to provide the means for obtaining a secure future, and a clean, natural environment. Okay, then peace, and this is promoting peace in our national and international policies, and promoting peaceful solutions to communal, national, and global problems, advocating for demilitarization, and that would include demilitarizing the police in this country, and collaborating with others to seek shared solutions to the problems we're facing. And then the eighth value that we have is responsibility, and that means being willing to act on behalf of people in need here and in elsewhere, even in other countries, including future generations, and being willing to act to promote a living planet, a sustainable planet in the future. Okay, so maybe this could do as a basic overview of some of my thinking of how to promote, or what are the kind of values we can derive from Buddhism to sustain us, to support us in our efforts to create social, economic, and political systems in which the drives, the forces of greed, hate, delusion, and other toxic motivations will be replaced by a kind of ethic of generosity, loving care and concern for others, and a wise discernment of the problems we face and their underlying roots. Okay, maybe we should open the floor or the panel to questions, but I just want to get up for a moment just to get some water to moisten. My throat is getting dry.
Sure, we'll wait for you.
Yeah, okay, it'll just take 1 minute,
No problem.
less than that.
Is there a process for submitting questions?
Yeah, I was about to announce that. Thank you for asking. So most of the people are mute right now. And when we open the floor to questions and comments, it would be best if you could raise your hand digitally. But if you don't know how to do that on Zoom, then I guess just speak up. But remember to unmute yourself before you do that.
Oh, can you explain maybe how to raise your hand digitally?
I'm not clear on that myself.
Because I thought there was a little icon, but I don't see it.
Yeah.
If you go into participants, if you're on Zoom, if you open the participants panel, you will see invite, mute me, raise hand.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
See how I just raised my hand there?
Yeah, we have already. Great.
Is anyone monitoring the chat? If you want to write a question to have him be asked a question?
Yeah, that's a good idea. And as Noel said in the beginning of the meeting, we'll try to give priority to those people who are part of the reading group. But in any case, everyone should ask the question and raise their hand. I'm sure we'll get to everyone by the end of the session.
Yeah, we still have a whole hour.
Okay.
Great. So Noel, would you like to go first and like open up the discussion?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Bhikkhu Bodhi, for this wonderful presentation, and this sort of tags along so perfectly with your book, you know, because that's so wonderful how the way you take the basic of the Buddha's path and sort of open it up to a much more public perspective and social perspective. So that's really wonderful. In terms of the transition, you know, to transform our society, as we've seen in the last 30 years, if not 40 years, it's been going on into towards reinforcing this neoliberal sort of fallacy. And now we see, you know, it has reached such a stage, but then at the same time, you know, there is like really few people have all the powers in their hands through having all the money. So the question is, how do you change that, you know? And I was wondering, can it even be done peacefully, or is that going to be having to be a bloody situation? You know, I'm more like thinking like what Joanna Macy was calling the forced turning. Looking at it more like a birthing a new society, and that includes, you know, some of the old has to die before the new can be born, and that includes, you know, a lot of suffering basically. And so I was wondering, do you see, for instance, the pandemic, you know, which adds to all those 4 issues that you lay down so naturally? Is the pandemic, can that work as a triggering effect, you know, to sort of get the ball rolling, or, you know, how do you see that, and how long will it take, you know, to...
I would say that the pandemic is almost giving us a message, a very clear message that the old systems are no longer adequate. I mean, they were never adequate, but it's just in a way highlighting and sort of underscoring with a special intensity how flawed the old systems are, and how unjust and almost irresponsible they are. The big question is whether we can, well, I would say not only pandemic, but what's particularly critical is the acceleration of climate change, which shows that we have a very, very narrow window in which to make the drastic changes that are needed if we're going to avoid whole-scale devastation. You know, of course, the pandemic is having very, very very, very grave consequences for people around the world. But suppose, let's say in a year, a vaccine is developed, in 2 years, there's enough vaccine to inoculate everybody in the world's population. So the pandemic vanishes. And so there's been a large death count, and many people have been sick, incapacitated, but still humankind emerges intact from the pandemic. This pandemic, just as they emerged intact from the Spanish flu back in 1918. So that's possible. But if we don't solve the problem of climate change, then we're toast, so to speak. So that is the issue that really has to be addressed, and not at the leisure, not at the slow, gradual, the leisurely pace that we're going, but it has to be done quickly, promptly, almost at break and thoroughly. What I would say is that, from the demonstrations, the climate marches that took place, wow, it's almost a year ago. It's hard to believe time goes by so quickly. I think it was around September 20th, 2019. Those mass marches and demonstrations around the world. But it shows that so many people are aware of the need to address climate change. But the big problem is this country. It's amongst all of the leading countries in the world, is this country almost alone, which is a kind of barricade, a barrier to any kind of effective action. Our only hope is, again, for a rapid change in the administration. I'm really sad about this. And again, I don't endorse candidates or oppose candidates, but I'm just not sure that a Joe Biden presidency will have the initiative, the drive to take the action that's necessary. The only hope is that there will be people working behind the curtain, so to speak, who will be pushing for drastic changes in climate policy. With the present administration, it's actually going in the wrong direction, opening up more and more tracts of land for extraction, more and more exploitation of lands for seeking oil and natural gas. So we're going in the wrong direction with this administration. How things will play in the future, I'm just not a prophet, so I can't foresee. But I'm just really hopeful that, especially younger people today, people in their 30s and 20s, who realize that it's their future that's at stake. I mean, even people of 20s, 30s, and 40s, their future is at stake, so they have to take the action that will bring the changes that are necessary. And they'll have the motivation for taking that action.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next question. Elizabeth, would you like to ask it yourself?
Sure, yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear very clearly, yeah.
Okay, great. I was just wondering about your thoughts on taking as exemplars people who have worked in nonviolence, considering the fact that it's incredibly dangerous and frightening to go up against, militarized police in the streets. And yet it seems that perhaps nonviolence is the only way. What can we draw from the lessons of people who have done nonviolent protests before us?
I would say nonviolence is absolutely critical. It's the only way. Violent resistance is not going, it's going to backfire. And it gives a pretext for those who are sort of the defenders of the citadel, who want to resist or to oppose any resistance and crush any opposition. It gives them the excuse they need to resort to violent action, to suppress those who take who try to oppose them violently. And since they are the ones who have all of the weapons, who have, you know, the instruments of destruction in their hands, whereas people who are, say, promoting progressive causes, if they try to take violent action, I mean, we just don't have the resources that they have. We could see this even in Trump, the speech that he gave. Was it, I'm getting them all mixed up, the one at Mount Rushmore, or was it the one he gave at Washington, D.C. on July 4th, where he speaks about left-wing first he uses left-wing fascists, then he turns them into agitators, looters, and thugs. So that provides the excuse, the pretext for militarized police and other of these groups to crack down on those who are standing up really on behalf of human solidarity and justice. So I say certainly it requires nonviolent action. And also maybe I'll throw in a thought might seem a little bit woozy here, a little bit idealistic, but it's something that I believe as a Buddhist, and that is that there is sort of invisible, it's not material, visible at the material level, but there is a power of thought and of mind which can affect changes in a way which is not perceptible, not directly visible. And so when people develop strong desire for change, motivated by love and compassion, and consciously cultivate those thoughts, those intentions, those purposes, and even do it collectively in groups, directing those thoughts towards the centers of power. It might seem, again, it seems a little bit like I'm a little batty with that belief, but I believe it has some kind of subtle influence which can bring about unexpected transformations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we're giving priority to our reading group members. So Inja, would you like to go next?
Yes, hello. Sorry. Thank you and welcome. One thing I noticed just when you were speaking is a lot of myself and this energy that's coming lately has been through political and these systems as far as solutions go. And I'm finding myself getting caught up into these arguments and thoughts, and it's all here. And I am affected here. And
Hey, what is, so I don't see your image. I don't know what here is.
Sorry. So, hello.
Yeah.
And so for me, I find what is more effective are looking for personal solutions. You know, because these big things about Donald Trump and, you know, the racism, police violence, you know, the environment becomes so overwhelming.
Yeah, yeah.
And I find that when I'm stuck here, I'm stuck in these solutions that have been gridded into my mind how I think. And that's where I go to meditation to try to clear that preformed idea thinking.
Yeah.
And I'm raising a daughter, and I want to entertain her. I want to raise her naturally and in peace and pleasure, so to speak. And I look on Netflix or on the entertainment and everything. And something that I'm just realizing now is violence is being fed to us as a solution to problems.
Yeah.
If you look at any entertainment, it's always a gun, force, power.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, I feel so overwhelmed, like, oh, my reaction is to be powerful. I've got to, you know. Otherwise, it's acquiescence, and I feel defeated.
Yeah.
So there's that middle road that I'm always searching for. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, certainly. I have to say that with probably cinema and television propagates in many ways, the idea that violence is the solution to the problems that we're facing. In a way, I think we should separate ourselves, detach ourselves from exposure to too much violent movies and and television. But maybe we take the examples of those who, through nonviolence, have affected major changes. And we go back and take the examples of like Gandhi, who, through the method of nonviolence, put an end to the British colonial rule over India. Martin Luther King, through the nonviolence, promoted civil rights in the United States. Nelson Mandela, through nonviolence, promoted change, the collapse of apartheid in South Africa. Some other examples of nonviolence.
But for me, it's like a personal thing, you know, like I know these grand stories, but as I'm trying to live and raise my daughter, like these messages and solutions are like infused every day. And how to do it, like resist that, you know, while raising the next generation without imposing or saying, okay, you know, like actions like daily. And that's what I find a struggle with, you know, that immediate reaction or transaction.
You mean without trying to like dictate to her that you should do things in this way or that way?
Because in a way that becomes almost an act of violence into itself.
Yeah,
right?
what I would say, probably there would be books and movies intended for children. How old is she?
12.
12.
Yeah.
But probably for children in that particular age group, there will be books and movies that create more healthy attitudes. Sort of expose her to those kinds of literature and movies.
Yeah, I mean, I just take her to nature now. I just take her away.
Actually, I have to say,
in the woods.
I have to say, one of the great problems that we face in this country is the loss of that immediate contact with nature. And I believe that there's even an expression that some psychologists have coined, nature
deficit disorder.
Deficit disorder, is that what it is?
I'm going into forest bathing and all of this, so that's what my mission is right now.
Yeah.
But then the reintegration into the regular world is, you know.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we need are, especially in cities, more parks, big parks, and people to be encouraged to go to the parks, and even small parks spread out through the city, like a different approach to city planning, so that we're not just exposed to streets with concrete and buildings and pavement.
Okay, thank you. We have a lot of questions, so let's move on. Sylvia, would you like to go next?
Sure. Okay, this is kind of stream of consciousness. I haven't really formulated this, but it's more of a bit of a statement and question at the same time in terms of how to address, you know, the apathy around a lot of the issues that Bhikkhu is referencing. I wonder, in terms of kind of a more passive movement, something came to mind. So as the COVID pandemic seems to be soaring through your country, I'm participating from Canada. What I've become aware of here, before, when most Canadians were really open to embracing Americans to come in, now there's this big, national fear, concern, and especially amongst the youth, of not opening our borders and keeping our borders closed. Everybody wants to keep out Americans, and it's not against American citizens. It's mostly against your president and the fact that nobody's doing anything really constructive. For instance, offering free COVID testing, or like addressing something in your whole medical, the lacking of your socialized medicine. That, the sentiment here is that it's just going to spread like wildfire through your country because you don't have any kind of socialized medicine.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So I wonder, Well, what I'm wondering is if more and more countries were to close their borders from Americans, I would think that some kind of nationalistic sentiment of like, I'm just trying to think what would happen, what's happened in the past when people have been annihilated from the tribe. When they're closed out of the tribe, then it's almost like something shifts that has to address like the shame that comes from that might give rise to some sort of collective action towards, well, we want to be part of the group. What do we have to do to be part of, to be accepted, internationally? I don't know. I'm just,
I understand what you're saying. I think that there will be, in this country, sad to say, a very polarized response to that. Probably it's starting already. There will be a group who, as you say, feels some shame that we are being rejected by the rest of the world, and then thinks for this reason we have to change. We have to really take a look back on the kinds of policies that we're adopting, the attitudes that we're adopting, and particularly this kind of, we have this expression, American exceptionalism, that we are the privileged country, the special country. God's gift to humanity is the United States. That there'll be a substantial number of people who are ready to jettison that idea and realize that we have to integrate with the rest of the world. But there will also be, in fact, there already is, a substantial block of the country who will see when we are rejected by other nations, they will see that we are being ostracized unfairly, and they will react almost violently to that kind of exclusion.
Yeah.
I think that others don't appreciate us. We are the ones who do so much for the rest of the international community, and nobody appreciates us. So therefore, we are the ones who have been supporting the other countries on climate initiatives. So we're not appreciated, so we withdraw from the Paris climate agreement. We have been supporting the World Health Organization. We're not appreciated. We withdraw from the World Health Organization.
Yeah. Yeah.
But hopefully, I mean, we could just hope that over the next year or so, with a change in administrations, there will be, hopefully that there will be a change of administrations, and an administration will come in that wants to repair our relationship with the rest of the world. But it will be a very, very tough fight to get single payer system of universal health care and to take action on climate change. That will take a big fight, no matter who is in charge of the federal government.
Thank you. And again, I'm prioritizing right now the people from the reading group, but if we make our questions short and precise, I'm sure we'll get all of them. So Kathy, I saw that you had your hand up. Would you still like to ask the question? Katie?
I think that Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi touched upon it already, but I do just want to say thank you so much for coming to our group and for speaking with us, because this is a very special blessing. Thank you. And so my question was about adolescence. Like you said, the importance of generations under us taking action, and how do we teach young children without inflicting more pain, or not pain, but fear, to act right?
It's an area where I don't have personal experience. But I have to say, I'm thinking of the case of Greta Thunberg, who said, I want you to panic. So she was speaking to adults, of course. maybe a little bit of fear could be a healthy stimulus to action, as long as the presentation is done skillfully, so it doesn't lead to a kind of mental paralysis by fear. And I think adolescents, at least from the age 13 on, would be able to understand that, because they're probably quite sophisticated young adolescents these days. So they could take us a little dose of fear as a motivation, particularly if they're shown that, you know, the gates are not completely closed yet against us, that we still have a possibility to prevail over the crises that we're facing, but we do have to act strongly, effectively, skillfully, and promptly. And then tell them it depends on you, your generation. So they'll look at us and say, but you are the ones who screwed up everything for us.
Yep, that's the sad truth. Okay, Charles, would you like to go next? Charles Olson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bhikkhu Bodhi, and to the group for making this possible. I've only been practicing for about 10 years. And one of the things that has struck me about Buddhism is captured in one of the Lojong sayings, regard all dharmas as dreams. And I find myself constantly going through a process of trying to scrape away my own preconceptions and prejudices. And so but at the same time, as a political activist, I feel that I do take sides. And so, for example, in the case of political parties, I understand on the one hand a desire not to pick sides, but on the other hand, from an activist perspective, although I agree that I'm skeptical that Biden is going to bring all the solutions we need to the table, there's certainly a lot more to work with in the Democratic side than there is the Republican side. So I guess my question is, when I start engaging in the political world, I do wind up making choices.
Yeah.
And you mentioned discernment. And I guess I sort of just wonder if you have your own process for ensuring that your discernment is fresh, like trying to scrape away the preconceptions that might cloud your right decisions. I don't, other than meditation, but I'm just wondering if you do anything to sort of question your own decisions or to keep your own mind open.
I have to say, I've been in a way sort of biased towards progressive perspectives, probably from the time I was in high school and college right up to the present. But one thing that I have to reject is a common misunderstanding of the right Buddhist attitude is that one doesn't take sides, one doesn't choose, but one just maintains a kind of detached neutrality about everything. I don't think that's a proper or healthy Buddhist attitude at all. But when one is facing an issue about which one is uncertain, one has to, of course, try to look at the issue from multiple points of view. But then one is aiming at a course of action that is going to be conducive to, using the Buddha standard, to one's own true well-being and happiness and the true well-being and happiness of others. So one has to lay out the different alternatives one is facing and then try to evaluate and assess them to determine which course is really looking at them impartially, going to contribute to the genuine well-being and happiness of oneself and others, and which course really, though it might be decorated with beautiful language and beautiful expressions, which course of action is really aimed at benefiting in unhealthy ways certain people who are seeking to gain power and privilege and dominance over others. And then one has to choose between these alternatives. So what I say with the proper Buddhist course is to make wise choices, wise and compassionate choices, not to just stand in the middle, not without making any choices.
Thank you. Lawrence, you had your hand up for a while now.
Yes, thank you. My question is, it might appear like I'm being very pessimistic, but I'm not. And I think Buddha himself, though he promulgated these great principles, at some level, he was also an activist from what little I've read.
Yeah.
Because if some two clans were at war, he would go up there and try to keep them from going and attacking each other.
Yeah.
And if there were situations where some poor people needed help, he would go there and try to influence them. He would also influence the not eating of meat without having major campaigns against that. So he was kind of an activist too. So maybe that's what we should try to be. But my real question is this. He came up with these principles because at that time, situation was maybe just as bad as now, though it wasn't so massive. And though it wasn't well known, because today it's internet, everybody knows some small thing that happens everywhere. There were kings and who would fight each other, and some king took over the country, he'd kill all his, some prince took over, he'll kill all his brothers, so that none of them would, then there would be major wars like King Ashoka, who finally converted and became a pacifist and encouraged Buddhism. But he was a terror. But the only thing he was honest about the war, he would say, I'm going to take over that country because of the resources. He wouldn't give an excuse like weapons of mass destruction or something like that. But those conditions existed there. In fact, in the mythology, there weren't stories or television, but there was mythology of war. The Pandavas and the Kauravas and the Bhagavad Gita is all about war. So those conditions existed even then. So my question is, that is why these probably will continue, because that's what Buddha said, life is dukkha. So would activism necessarily end dukkha is my question.
That's a good question. I don't think we could ever establish a perfect utopia here on Earth. There'll always be problems. These roots, what we call the unwholesome roots, greed, hatred, and delusion, are just so deeply rooted in human nature that it's a momentous task even to reduce them a little bit, not to speak about overcoming them. So there'll always be problems, always be conflicts, be friction. There'll always be people trying to get personal advantage for themselves at the expense of others. So we can't expect to have a perfect society. I don't have any illusions about that, about creating what they sometimes call a pure land on earth or a paradise on earth. But what we do have to try to achieve is a social, political, social and economic order that contributes to, let us say, that is sustainable and that contributes to human well-being, at least to the best of our limited abilities, to promote, as I say, economic, social, racial justice, to promote a sustainable climate. And that, I say, lies within our ability.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, would you like to ask your question, which you posted in the chat?
Yeah, sorry, I'm walking. So thank you. So following up on what Katie was asking about adolescence, what about the rest of us who are, of legal age, whether we're in our 20s or our 50s? There's a lot of people who might agree with everything you said, but they're sitting fat and happy in their house and they're not doing anything. So what can we do beyond modeling by example to get more people to start to be taking action? Thank you.
I think that's where those of us who have some commitment to these, what we call progressive causes, have to make it very clear that, particularly I would say with the climate change, that the very future of humanity is at stake here, and that we have very limited time in which to act. Connecting climate change with the economy through something like the Green New Deal, like a lot of people facing problems of unsatisfactory standard of living, unemployment, lack of job opportunities. So if we connect this to the real needs of people, we have on the one hand the kind of stick, which is the fear of a devastated, destabilized climate motivating people to take action. On the other hand, the carrot of greater economic prosperity, affluence, and security. And bringing these together, this will hopefully motivate people to give up their complacency and work together to take action.
Thank you.
But I think, but one thing we do have to face, though, that tendency towards negligence, complacency, heedlessness, it's again another very deeply ingrained human characteristic. You know, that's why the Buddha speaks again and again of appamada, diligence, heedfulness, being conscientious, being consistent.
Thank you. Jenny, you asked your question a while ago in the chat. Would you like to ask it in person?
Sure. Let me turn my video on. Sorry, I just got off work.
Are you in Baltimore?
Sorry?
Oh, you're from New York.
Yes. Yeah.
I thought this was a Baltimore group.
Oh, well, I was spreading the word yesterday about.
Oh, I see.
I found out very late. Okay. I think you answered the question, because the person prior to me just had a very similar question, which was how can we draw in more Buddhists who may be reticent to get involved in activism. And in my experience, I've had several reasons put to me. Is one, they don't want to get involved in things that are divisive, and they politics is too divisive. And I mean, particularly, I think many are even thinking that now because of some of the protests had some violence, so this may be giving them even more cause to think that. And there may be other reasons too that I've come across where the person prior to me talked about being kind of fat and happy at home, but I would describe it another way is maybe being a little bit more what do you want to call it? Habituated to our little bubbles of comfort on the meditation question. I have run into those sort of interactions a lot. So I've tried different methods, and the only things that I've come across that seem to be helpful is in some of the anti-racism trainings, where they teach you very specifically how to draw in allies with talking points, rather than being butting heads, find common interests as a talking point. Like, so perhaps maybe there's a couple of common interests that you think I can bring up when I talk to Buddhists who are like, I don't want to get involved. But we all have common interests as Buddhists, so.
Yeah, and I have to say that this is a problem common amongst Buddhists, and it goes to that attitude that Charles brought up of the ideal attitude of the Buddhist is not to make choices, not to take sides, not to get involved in anything that's a little bit divisive. But I don't, as I said, one should not be afraid, as long as one is strongly grounded in principles of nonviolence and compassion, not to be afraid of taking sides. One has to stand up for the causes of, especially what's in the interest of promoting justice and sustainability. And so if one has a concern for, and particularly if one is really committed to the Buddhist values of loving kindness and compassion, that doesn't mean that one just remains sitting in one's meditation seat thinking, let all beings be well, let all beings be happy, let all beings be free from suffering. But if it stirs the heart, then one has to find ways to take action to alleviate that suffering, to tackle the causes of suffering, to promote well-being and happiness. Even though it requires that one sort of leaves, at least temporarily, the comfort of one's cocoon, but it's essential if one is really going to take those values seriously.
And maybe it's more like also putting it to test your practice off the cushion as as you encounter not problems necessarily but challenges.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a way to show up. One could even see it as a form of practice. Don't think that practice only takes place in quietude and not in the heat of action, but the place where you develop your practice is in human interactions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jen, would you like to go next? Jen Moss.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, very good.
Can I be heard? Good. I was going to ask about racism.
Yeah.
You see it everywhere, and the horrid brutality that we've seen on television, George Floyd, all that stuff, and also to know that it's been going on for a long time, long before we were able to see it, before we had video cameras and such.
Yeah.
But it's also the subtle things and the neighbors and friends who have attitudes and presumptions, and I wonder what more can I do to confront this and to try to end it, aside from examining my own maybe ingrained racism that I might have been, growing up. I try to do that, but what can I do when I hear friends, people I love, say things that are just, wrong and cruel and untrue? What can I do? And then what can I do not just with the friends, but in general, for the world?
Okay, so there are two levels here. One is at the level of interpersonal relations or interpersonal communications, and the other is, let's say, more commitment to transformative action. Okay, at the level of interpersonal relationships, I think when you hear somebody speaking in a particularly nasty or offensive way, you just have to, softly and gently, and even with some compassion, correct them and tell them that they shouldn't speak that way, and maybe try to but not in a way that's going to antagonize them, to irritate them, but maybe
that's hard.
Try to get them to see things from another perspective, from the perspective of the other person. So that is at least one suggestion of what to do in interpersonal relationships. On a larger scale, probably there are various organizations that you can either join or participate in some of the actions. And so the way these movements work is by drawing in large numbers of people. And so even though you might just be one individual, but when you join an organization or a movement or an event in which other people are participating, you increase the spread of that organization by at least one person and one voice.
Thank you.
Thanks. Chris, do you still have your question?
Yeah, I do. Can everyone see me all right?
Okay, let me increase the volume.
Can you see me okay?
I can see you. It's okay. The voice was, go ahead.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, first of all, thanks to this group for opening this up to the public. I'm not a part of this group, but I just joined randomly. And then also, thank you for just speaking with us. I appreciate it. So what I have is kind of a personal question. Like, I talk with friends who don't have the same progressive ideals that I have.
Yeah.
And what they have come back with pushback that they give me often is that because I'm a person of privilege in terms of just like a white straight male who has had a lot of things provided to me in my life, I have the ability and the time to be able to care about other people and try to practice these Buddhist ideologies that I follow. And they say that's a privilege of mine, where they weren't given all the things that I was given. They had to work for everything that they wanted. And so how can I say like someone shouldn't like extract natural gas or produce meat or do something that will put food on the table for their family? And the only reason I have this Buddhist mindset and principles are because of all the privilege that I've been given. And if I didn't have all that, then maybe I would just care about making $1 and trying to make capitalism move forward. And I struggle with addressing that because in a way they are right, and I have been given a lot in my life, and that does give me, like, I work at a job, I can work from home now, like I have time to do all this stuff. And where if I just was worrying about my next dollar and putting food on my table, I wouldn't be sitting time here with a bunch of Buddhists talking about whatever it is we're talking about. I'd be out like trying to make money to put food over my head. So it makes me feel very guilty too. So I don't know if you just have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I could really understand where those people who speak to you are coming from. And I think one has to have some kind of empathy with them and not just stand up against them and think that they're being selfish and foolish. Because, okay, let us take people who are working maybe in, as you mentioned, the natural gas industry, coal miners, people working at meat processing plants. Yeah, so they have to earn their livings, and one has to sympathize with them. And certainly not denounce them for what they're doing, because they have to support themselves and their families. But at least make them try to understand. This is just an idea that I'm throwing out, that even though tentatively we're not asking them to give up their jobs and to go into the ranks of the unemployed, but to understand that for the long range good of our country, humanity as a whole, it's necessary to make a transition away from reliance on fossil fuels towards clean types of energy. And I mean, this is a problem that the advocates of clean energy have been facing in dealing with that kind of objection. And what they are saying is that what has to be done is to provide people who are working in the fossil fuel industries with training in new forms of livelihood, particularly livelihood in green energy, so that they can make a transition when forms of clean green energy become more prominent. They will be able to transition away from their jobs in the fossil fuels into clean energy. So that's just one example, but there are maybe many areas where that could apply. But one can't just reject people like that offhand and think, well, I am superior because I have these better living conditions.
Yeah, or it brings a sense of guilt, like I don't deserve this, or it's like maybe I'm wrong because I do have all this privilege and like they're right because I see it so.
Yeah, I don't think it's a simple matter. It's a simple matter of right and wrong, but that in a certain way that they are right, that they have to, we have to take account of their needs as well. But what we have to do is, in a sense, put to the side our own personal needs, our own personal perspectives, and then try to get an insight into what is going to contribute in the long run to the greatest good of our society and the world. And then we have to find a way to gradually move from our particular position where we find ourselves now to another position where we can support that kind of transition. I have to say, I'm getting a bit tired of speaking.
Oh yes, we agreed that we would finish around 7, so
Yeah.
it's getting close. It's 6:50 right now, so I don't know. Should we do one last question or should we close? How tired are you?
Okay, maybe we could take one last question.
Okay. Well, Philip asked his question a while ago, so maybe we should give him this opportunity. Philip, are you there?
Yes, hello.
Oh, I see. My old friend Philip.
Hello, Bhante. How are you today?
Okay.
It's nice to see. Like Jenny, I got the notice of this, but it was great to see. I have ties to Baltimore. I went to school there, and I'm very fond of Baltimore. But my question, which I put in the chat, you know, you brought up the point about environmental chaos being a priority. And sorry, I'm just getting to the question, so I have it in front of me. You prioritize the imperative to address climate chaos, which I agree wholeheartedly. And in light of the fact that in aggregate, animal agriculture is the most destructive ecological force on the planet, and considering the imperative of refraining from killing sentient beings as articulated in the first precept, could you share briefly your thoughts on veganism as an imperative with regard to a Buddhist social justice stance?
Certainly, I would advocate. I have to say, I'm not a vegan myself. I am vegetarian, though not vegan. So occasionally, I mean, occasionally I will have some yogurt or some cheese. I would say that the attitude, even quite apart from the impact on climate change, but the attitude of human beings towards animal life and the mass destruction of animal life as a source of food, to provide a source of food, is just something which is devastating, horrendous. You know, so out of a Buddhist attitude of compassion and loving kindness, I would say an essential part of the transition to a better society would be a wide-scale move away from animal agriculture and dependence on animal sources of food towards a plant-based diet, a predominantly plant-based diet.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bhante, and thank you for being here with us today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Noel, would you like to close this session?
Okay, well, thank you so much, Bhikkhu Bodhi. Thank you. That was really wonderful. And thank you for taking the time to come and speak to us. This is a group called Meditating for Life. And we opened actually the book, you know, for everybody who wanted to show up for this discussion, because we felt, you know, there is no reason why to limit it to our little group. But please, Anya, can you just unshare this poster? We can do that after everybody has finished talking. Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to thank you, Bhikkhu Bodhi.
Okay, thank you.
For this most enlightening and inspiring conversation. And it was such an honor for us to have you here and to share this moment with us. And so just before we close, would you like to add some final thoughts?
Maybe I will just recite a blessing in Pali.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so this is a standard chant which is used in the Theravada tradition. It invokes the blessing power of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Bhavatu sabba mangalang, rakantu sabba devata, sabba buddhanu bhavena, sada soti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang, rakantu sabba devata, sabba dhammanu bhavena, sada soti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang, rakantu sabba devata, sabba sanganubhavena sadasoti bhavantu te. And then the thought occurred to me while I was chanting, since you asked for final thought. And I say that it's incumbent upon us as Buddhists to put our Buddhist values and our ideals and our aspirations into action by contributing in some way to promoting a more, let's say, a more harmonious, more benevolent, more benign, more sustainable society and culture. But also we have to remember that unless we are something like a super person, we can't do everything. So what each person should do is to find that particular area in which they, or that particular cause in which they feel a strong calling, a sort of a compulsive vocation, a sense of vocation. So for some, it might be anti-racism. For some, it might be working on against climate change. Others, it might be protecting animal life. For others, it might be working in restructuring the economy. So one could sort of search within oneself to find what particular cause responds most to one's own sort of sense of inner vocation, and then not neglecting the other areas, but devote one's time and energy to that particular cause. And that way we avoid burning out by trying to take on too much, but we also find this particular channel for using the Buddhist values of kindness, compassion, impartiality, and justice, using that to make our own contribution towards helping to create a better world. Okay.
Yes, yes, exactly. Thank you. That was sort of my last question, which I never got to ask. So this was the perfect answer. So thank you again, Bhikkhu Bodhi. And also I wanted to thank you, to thank Anya Brie, who actually is the one who had the chutzpah to contact Bhikkhu Bodhi and to organize this event tonight. So without her, it would have never happened. So Anya, thank you. And before we go, I just maybe like to bring to everybody's attention Bhikkhu's monastery called Bodhi Monastery.
No,
this temple.
This I have to correct. People think that I'm connected with Bodhi Monastery. Not so.
Oh.
No, I lived there for 4 years, and it wasn't named after me.
Oh, so what's the name of the other monastery that you live in?
It's called Zhuangyan Monastery.
Okay, Zhuangyan Monastery. Yeah. So perhaps people can go to the website there and see.
The website, it's under the umbrella organization, the Buddhist Association of the United States.
Here it is, okay. And so you can maybe go there and look for Bhikkhu Bodhi's article and lectures and recommended books.
And we do have, on the website, you'll find we have a class every Saturday morning from 9:30 to 11:30 with a half-hour meditation, and then about an hour and a half class on, we study the teachings of the Buddha through the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses.
Wonderful. So thank you. Yeah. And maybe also I want to mention the Buddhist Action Coalition in New York. If anybody is in New York, perhaps they can look up to this as a possible, cause, basically.
Yeah, I saw that some of the participants here are from the Buddhist Action Coalition. Jenny O'Donnell, Philip Murphy. I saw Eric Manigian.
Because I put the poster, I think, on their page, and I was a member of the Buddhist Action Coalition since it started. I put myself on their mailing list, although I have to say I never found a chance to go to any of the meetings. But I was aware of it from the beginning, and I thought it was such a great cause because in my Sangha in Los Angeles for many, many years, there was that attitude a little bit by most of the people, you know, oh, we are Buddhist, we just, you know, meditate on a cushion, but politics is kind of underneath us, you know. And so I was so pleased to see that I think the American Buddhist in general is kind of changing their tune about that. So that's very nice. And one more thing I want to mention is if anybody is interested in studying Bhikkhu Bodhi's book, The Noble Eightfold Path, Way to the End of Suffering. No, Anya, please don't do that to me. After everybody is finished talking, you can put
sure.
it.
People appreciate more your face than the flyer. I agree.
Yeah. And just wanted to say, yeah, this is the group who organized this event is studying the Bhikkhu Bodhi's book. And so we are open, since we are doing it by Zoom. Most of the people are from Baltimore, but anybody is welcome. And we are basically using it specifically to learn not so much just meditation, but to pay attention to how we live our life and how we can put Buddhism into action. So this was a wonderful way to put those inner kind of exercise that we have been doing and bring them up to a more public sort of action. So, or at least and explore that. So now, once we finish everything, we are going to put that little poster on the screen so that everybody can have the information about what we do. I do meditation and this study group, and also Painting for Life, which is another way to get into healing and awakening, but with using art as a healing practice. So if anybody is interested, there is my email there, you can contact me. So thank you so much, everybody. This was a wonderful turnout. Thank you, Bodhi.
Okay, thank you.
Again. And
thank you.
Good night, everybody. Stay well, be safe, and spread the love, not the virus.
Thank
you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.